Immigration workshop session. This session is going to be recorded, so I will start recording momentarily. Welcome to our session today. This is Immigration Compliance and Changes, Engaging Stakeholders. A couple of Zoom tips before we start. If you could please change your name so that it indicates your name and your university affiliation, that would be great. If you could also turn on your video and mute yourself, that would also be appreciated. And we encourage you to connect with your colleagues through the chat function and to be prepared to ask some questions today. We have some great panelists here who are willing to take the time to share their experiences, and we look forward to hearing from them. And with that, I will turn it over to Emma.
Great, thanks, Elizabeth. Hi, everyone. My name is Emma Swift, and I'm the Associate Director of the Office of International Education at the University of Vermont, and I'll be hosting the panel today. We have three really excellent panelists from three very different types of institutions to have a conversation around engaging and building buy-in with stakeholders to meet kind of our institutional and our clients' compliance obligations. And having partners in your compliance work is critical to being in any immigration office, whether you're working with students or scholars or employees or any kind of combination thereof. And as you'll learn from our speakers, they have kind of a range of experiences. Stakeholder engagement has certainly, I feel like, been put to the test. Like, how strong are your relationships in the last 12 months as we've gone through a lot of really rapid changes? And I think the essence of engagement is vital regardless of who's running the shop in Washington, regardless of who's running your institutions and where you may sit within your institutions, and regardless of institutional size and kind of international population size, as this work matters because having partners on campus matters. And so I'm really excited to hear from our panelists today and hope that kind of whatever your role is within compliance work at your institution, that you'll be able to find some useful takeaways. This is a pretty quick session. We just have an hour together. And so I'm guessing we won't have very much time for questions at the end, but all three of our panelists and I are all willing to welcome any emails from you afterwards. If you hear someone say something that sounds like, that could work at my institution, I want to know more, feel free to shoot us an email. We'll make sure that we get all of our email addresses in the kind of at the end in the chat. Feel free to use the chat option as we go through. I'll be monitoring that and we'll prompt speakers if there are kind of there's kind of a theme of common questions. But what I'd like to do is go ahead and get started, and I'll have the panelists introduce themselves as they answer our first question, which kind of relates to their institution. So for Kim and Jen and Susan, if you could introduce yourselves and share where you work, and at your institution, who are the key stakeholders or partners in your immigration compliance work? And are there any characteristics of your institution that may have shaped that? And for everyone, I'll paste those questions as we go through them into the chat, just in case you pop off and pop on, you can kind of follow along with where we are.
All right, I can kick it off. This is Susan Ellison, and I'm the director of the Office of Visa and Immigration Services at Dartmouth College. Hi, everyone. It's really nice to see you all today. I have been at Dartmouth for about 10 years, and when I joined, the office had already sort of reorganized and split into, and the programming side of the office went under the Dean of the College area. And then our office, Visa and Immigration Services, went under the General Counsel. So I think that's somewhat of a unique reporting structure for an international office. So I report directly to the General Counsel, and as such, that works pretty well from a compliance standpoint. They're a pretty big stakeholder, and I am able to have regular communication and meetings with the General Counsel's office. We actually share office space, and so we're collaborating and working together quite a lot. And that's been incredibly important, especially these last few years as advocacy and compliance have taken on a much, an even bigger presence in our office and at our institution. And then I would just say other stakeholders, We don't have a federal relations office in Washington, D.C., so we do have someone in our provost office who has government relations responsibilities. And so I do work closely with her and with the provost's office on compliance issues. And they were a major partner, especially this past year, as we kept getting different and changing and sometimes zero guidance from SEVP. So that was important. And then also from a compliance perspective, our office works very closely with HR and payroll. We are a student and scholar office. And so on issues of compliance and wages and terminations and things of that nature, we're working very closely with them. And also this past year with COVID, questions around the ability to work from overseas, which I'm sure many of you were faced with those types of questions, issues around social security numbers and things like that. And then I would just mention also thinking about the structure of our office and our institution, we don't have a dedicated IT person. And I found that, especially in the last year, but in the last several years, having central IT as a stakeholder in terms of helping us facilitate new processes and systems to help us address different concerns around remaining in compliance, things like how to best monitor addresses of students if they're here, there, and everywhere while they're still enrolled and things like that. So I would list those. And then outside of Dartmouth, I would mention our professional associations, NAFSA. I work with ALA, and then also the President's, and then our congressional delegation in New Hampshire. And I'll talk more about that later. I'll pass it off now.
I can go next if that's all right. So I'm Jen Curry from Bridgewater State University. So I was thinking about this question in terms of who are our key stakeholders at BSU, and a little bit different than Dartmouth. We actually sit in academic affairs, and that has been extremely helpful because those are some of our biggest constituents in terms of helping to keep students in compliance, whether it's making sure students are enrolled full time. I think everybody went through the wonderful process of figuring out what in-person classes were available to students. So that was a huge help for us to already be in academic affairs and have a close relationship with our faculty. And then we have a very close relationship with our cabinet, so our president and provost. And being in academic affairs, my supervisor, my boss, reports directly to the provost. So we have a direct line to the provost, which is really helpful, as you can imagine, for a lot of different reasons. So in addition to that, we obviously have to have good relations with the deans of the colleges, different faculty members who are chairs of our departments, because they're responsible for making different decisions and allowing students into classes or making provisions for them. One of our big stakeholders for compliance is also working with our internships and careers services folks to make sure that students are not doing anything they shouldn't be, that they're not supposed to be doing, making sure that they're approved for, CPT and things that they are academic training if there are J students. So that's been a really great relationship that we continue to cultivate over the years. And then we don't actually have an immigration attorney or general counsel on our campus. So we've relied heavily with networks that our president has with local immigration attorneys, and also the Massachusetts Council for International Education, which is a collective of the state universities, community colleges, and the UMass system. And I see some of our Macy members on the call today. So some of you may be familiar with that process, and that has been a wonderful network for us to access immigration services with the local members. So I think those are some of our biggest ones, and I'll turn it over to Kim and we can see where that goes.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's really great to see a bunch of familiar names and some familiar faces. So welcome. I'm Kim Howard. I'm the director of the Office of International Education at the University of Vermont. We are an inbound, outbound office. And on the inbound side, we serve matriculated students, exchange students. We do immigration as well as programming, as well as I don't like my roommate and I'm very homesick. I mean, we do it all. We also file H-1B petitions and then liaise with outside counsel on permanent residency cases. Up until, I don't know, about 6 months ago or so, we were in the Division of Enrollment Management with Student Financial Services at undergraduate admissions and the Registrar's Office for about 15 years. And now, like Jen, we report through the Provost's office. And so we're in the kind of academic affairs and student success side of things. We have all of the same stakeholders that have already been mentioned by both of my colleagues. I'd say the only other one I would mention for us that has been really important is our tax office. Sometimes they learn things and they give us a heads up about things. That's been really useful. And in our case, the tax office is separate from payroll and HR. We do have a federal relations office on our campus, and that's a really important place for us as well. And like Susan we'll talk about, we've relied on our congressional representation in some of the more interesting moments over the last year. And one of the questions was, are there characteristics of your institution that have helped shape who our stakeholders and partners are? And it's so broad. I mean, I can say that generally our general counsel's office prefers that we follow the law at UVM. And so that largely has helped kind of inculcate throughout the community this sense that, okay, this is something that's important and we should be paying attention. And that has certainly made our job much easier.
Thanks, Kim. Thanks all. So before we go into kind of the turbulencies of the last 12 months, I'd love to hear from each of you on what your approach has been for engaging stakeholders around really routine immigration matters that largely don't shift over time. So kind of some of the things that we have known to be true, they're kind of tried and true regulations that we need to comply with. How do you engage stakeholders around those types of issues?
Okay, and I can just jump in and start and say that in terms of our J1 and H1B or employment-based immigration compliance, our most important partners have been our business managers who serve sort of like human resources reps within their units. We have annual workshops where we go over, here are all the big kind of things that have been going on, and really trying to be as visible as possible and as speedy as possible in our responses to them so that they trust us and know to come to us. For us, because we don't report to general counsel's office, that also is a really important, we had a significant change over in that office a couple of years ago. And, you know, we said, let's do lunch. And we had a little session with everybody and made sure they knew who everyone on our staff was, et cetera. That was a really important thing. And then from time to time, sending articles that may be particularly relevant just for them to be aware of, that we know these things are going on. And then the last thing I'll say, just because Emma Swift is so very good at it, is our approach to engaging our academic advising partners has really been very, very strong personal relationships, coffees, lunches, and really being like the kind of first people that we each call. They call each other in specific student situations. And so I'll back off and let Susan and Jen jump in.
So I can't even remember a time, Emma, when anything we did was routine, but we have a group that was formed when the prior administration was first going into office. There was a real concern around what was going to happen with DACA and undocumented students. And so the general counsel formed what we call at the time it was called the DACA working group, but it has since become quickly the immigration working group, because the first thing we ended up having to deal with was the travel bans. But that group has stayed together for these last 4 years and continues to meet every term. And I wish we had started that group sooner, because it's been incredibly effective. It's a group of senior administrators across the entire institution. So offices that work with both the international student and scholar populations that are more compliance focused, some are more academic focused, but it's all senior administrators. I co-chair the group with the essentially the vice provost for an international, and we discuss what's happening in immigration every term, give them updates so they're hearing it from us. We also talk a lot about, what is Dartmouth doing in response to different things that are happening, and how are things going to be messaged to the greater community. And what that has done is provided us with a platform to be able to say something once to a big group and capture quite a lot of people across campus and not have to answer the same question 20 or 30 times. So that's been an incredibly effective tool for us. It's also provided us with a way to have consistent messaging across campus and also identify who's going to be the point person on a particular issue, who's going to put a statement on their website or put information on their website, and then we'll all point to the other, to that website. And I've just found that this group, it seems very much, it's a common sense thing. And I'm sure maybe some of you have these similar types of setups where you are, but I have found it to be one of the best things we've done. And it's been incredibly effective. And as I said, it continues to meet now and will continue to be. And I was really happy because yesterday we met, and for the first time in a very long time, I had more good news to share with the group than bad. And that was really a pleasant surprise for all of us. So that was nice.
Susan, there was a question that came in. How frequently does that group meet?
So we're a quarter system at Dartmouth, and so we do it every term. So four times a year we meet, and it's usually about an hour and a half meeting. I put together the agenda and we go through it, and then we send out minutes afterward, and that's how we've done it. It's been pretty effective.
Great. So I agree with Susan. When was a time when we did things routinely? I don't recall either. When we first got this question, I actually kind of laughed internally and said, well, I just keep telling everybody it's not us, it's the government. That's how, right? That we have to remind folks that we don't work for the government. You work for your university and you represent the interests of your students and scholars, right? And so I think there's that tendency that in this role, we are the bearers of bad news. We are the people who constantly say, but you can't do this and you can't do that. So establishing those relationships and trying to get ahead of things, and just, reminders to your key offices like, hey, we're coming up on fall, or the semester's supposed to start. Just a reminder that for international students, for instance, they can't just go ahead and work, and this is the process. Those kinds of regular messages I think are really important, and establishing those relationships, continually reaching out, not being afraid to say you can't do that. I think that's one of those areas where we get boxed in, but it's important to remind folks that you're telling people these things because you want the school to remain in compliance. You don't want to jeopardize the student or the scholar's future, and just how can you work together as partners to achieve what you both want to do is very important. So that's kind of how I approach these things with different folks on campus. Again, being in academic affairs, I think gives us a different relationship with our faculty. And that's a good thing, because sometimes there is that faculty staff divide. And so being able to be part of academic affairs to say, we want to help you achieve your academic goals, but these are the ways that you can and cannot do these things. And how can we help you think creatively about different solutions has been really huge at Bridgewater. We're definitely a campus of relationships. So when you don't have those, you don't get anything accomplished.
Thanks, Jen. There was a time once, people, when things were fairly routine. I may have just blocked out the last handful of years and like to go back to that space. I will share one thing that I have done at UVM is offer workshops for people who are maybe our unlikely stakeholders. These are just people around campus and jobs who don't necessarily have work that is as tangential to the immigration compliance world, but are interested and might be eager allies for our international students. And so offering them basically Immigration 101 to help them understand some of the experiences of our international students as it relates to immigration compliance has been a great opportunity to learn about some things on campus that we might not have known about at a big university, public flagship university, and kind of forge new pathways. And so that's something else that we've tried out. So now we're going to go into the not so steady seas and think about, in particular, the last 12 months, but most of the Trump administration certainly, but in particular, the last 12 months have offered a host of significant changes or threats of changes, which I think in terms of engaging our stakeholders in many ways play out equally. And so could you share some lessons learned from engaging stakeholders during emerging and time-sensitive issues?
I'm happy to jump in first. So I think with the past 12 months or more, just reminding people that these were fluid situations, because something would come out and it would be very unclear if this was going to be enforced, and if so, when would that be enforced and what does that look like on your campus? So contingency planning with my team was paramount to help figure out an if-then situation. That was really helpful. I think, to be honest, we were all kind of just scrambling at some of these times where things would come out and you didn't quite know how that was going to impact everybody, but you tried your best to plan based on, if there's only so many courses available online or in person, what does that mean for all of these students? We don't have a huge population of international students on our campus, so it was a little easier for us. We know all of our students very well. We know their majors, we know the programs that they're enrolled in, so we knew pretty right off the bat which courses would be available in person, so that helped us plan. And I think trying not to panic as much as you can, because the students, by whatever month it was, they had really had it with all of the different regulations and changes that were being pushed out, and they were panicked enough. So trying to remain calm for their sake, like we could panic under the surface, like I'm sure we all were, but trying to remain that, open, calm, reliable office for the students was really critical for us. And then also with our stakeholders, coming to them with different scenarios so that they did not feel like they were responsible for solving this problem. It was really helpful to work with them together when we did our if-then planning to say, these are the different scenarios that we could possibly see, coming to fruition. What do you think you could offer? Are these reasonable? Do you have the resources to implement these things? That was really helpful because I think it really brought down their panic in the other offices, because they were just trying to work with us as best as possible to figure out how to still keep international students on campus or how to get them here. So that was helpful for us.
For me, one of the key things was sort of creating ad hoc groups of stakeholders to deal with specific issues so that I could send a message to a particular group and know that I was going to would get out to the right people. So, for example, on government policy changes and things like that, without the federal or government relations office having a key person in the provost office, someone in OGC, and sort of saying to them, here's what's happening, and you go ahead and send this to who you think should know about it, but I want to let you know this is happening, and these are the possible outcomes that we might see. And that has gone on all the way up to the most recent OPT receipt problems that we were still having. So that was helpful. And then on things like the SEVP operational guidance, again, kind of identifying a key group of individuals, including, senior leadership, to say, here are the things, here's what's happening, here's sort of the risk assessment, here are the different types of interpretations of this, and this is what I know and don't know, and trying to always get ahead. And I know that was so hard over these last few years when we would just feel like a constant barrage of things coming at us, often late on Fridays, and trying to figure out how to manage it, but just being able to kind of identify key people who would be the final decision makers on certain things that were happening on campus, and making sure the message got to them as early and as quickly and as clearly as possible. So I think that was sort of my strategy. And then as far as students as stakeholders, we did end up doing some town halls, which we don't do very often, but I felt there were a couple of times when it really warranted it, when we were having new students come for the fall and trying to explain what the rules were, at least as far as we understood them, and how Dartmouth was interpreting the guidance. And then the elimination of the duration of status rule. I felt that one would create probably the greatest amount of havoc. And so and had the least amount of understanding around what it meant. And so we did offer town halls on that. And I thought that was a helpful way to cover, again, as many folks as we could in a shorter amount of time.
And I think in our office, one of the biggest lessons learned is that these things always occur on Friday afternoon or when you're on vacation. Or at least they did when Emma and I were on vacation. I think in terms of things that haven't already been covered, is that sometimes it's important what not to say to your constituents or to your stakeholders. I'm thinking about the October 8th kind of information, that the decision that came out from the Department of Labor and the Department of Homeland Security regarding these insane kind of prevailing wage requirements for H-1B filings. And I, went and started to learn all kinds of things about wage surveys that I didn't know anything about before, with our Human Resources Office and our Institutional Research Office. But I didn't reach out to the people who would be most affected. Like, we heard from one client who's like, hey, I read this thing. And I'm like, well, don't worry about it. There's these lawsuits that are going to happen, and let's see. We'll be back in touch, because theirs was a long time coming, and we were really lucky we didn't have any imminent cases. But at the end of the day, I eventually had a quick exchange with our dean of our graduate college just before the decisions came out, that from the lawsuits that stayed everything, and said, hey, we got to go back to the old way. And she said, I'm really glad I didn't know about this on October 8th. And so I think that there is this really careful balance, and it really depends on, your tenure and your role within your institution, and kind of the maturity, I guess, of your relationships within your institution and within the leadership of your institution, about kind of where those balances are. And like, when's it okay just to tell your boss, hey, we know this thing is going on and we're checking on it. When is it appropriate? In this case, I also reached out to general counsel and said, hey, we should sue somebody, because this is a really big deal, or what have you. It's kind of like, who do you kind of minimally have to let know? And then at what point do you kind of sound the alarm and say, all right, folks, we need to have more people kind of really understand what the ramifications of this might be.
Thanks, Kim. One thing I might add that I'm just having this memory of is when the duration of status regulations were out there. So Kim mentioned during her intro that we just recently changed reporting lines within the institution, and so we have a great new boss, and who doesn't understand kind of the immigration world as well, because it's just not something that's kind of something that she's done. And so I'm thinking about when we did kind of a back of the napkin calculation of what is this going to cost us in terms of human resources to help students, guide students, educate students and scholars on this new process for doing extensions when you're admitted only for a shorter period of time. And I think sometimes it's thinking about, how do we put things into terms that others are going to understand, right? I think that most of the people on this call live and breathe during your work world immigration. And so it's very easy to understand. DS goes away, lots of things fall apart for us in terms of how we do our work. But that means duration of status meant nothing probably to Kim's boss. And so kind of putting that into terms of, well, what's the dollar amount that would be associated with a human processing all of that additional work? That might raise it to the level of thinking, maybe we do want to consider signing on to something. And UVM went a slightly different route than we initially thought, of signing on to a letter for the duration of status regulations. But I think sometimes it's like translating this immigration language to whatever language it is that others are going to understand. One thing that I've kind of heard throughout that I want to name specifically also, though, is that I think especially when things are emerging, it's very helpful to have the trust that Kim referenced of kind of what's the maturity of those relationships. But I think also giving people predictable things to expect. And so maybe that's telling people up front, you will hear from us on these intervals, even if not much has changed. And so I'm thinking of what Susan mentioned of your regular quarterly meetings with your population. Maybe it's every 2 weeks you're sending out a communication to students just so they know they didn't miss anything as it relates to the evolving rules around online guidance. But where can you build in kind of predictable structure so that people can access the information they need without feeling like they might have missed something? So there are certainly lots of opportunities here. I'm also really curious to hear from our panelists on challenges you've experienced, kind of roadblocks, hurdles in engaging your stakeholders in all of this process.
I can jump in and say one of the challenges definitely this year has been, didn't you already tell me about this? And it's like, no, this is actually a different immigration thing, and trying to really help educate people. And I remember distinctly when I was approaching folks in October, and then we had kind of two very different issues going on. And I was really clear, like, okay, you know, I sent this other email on this date at this time about this other subject. This is a very different thing, because there's so much going on, particularly when you put everything next to kind of aside COVID-19 and what our institutions have been struggling with in terms of just true survival, that it's been, you know, how do you help people understand this is a distinct issue? It is equally important. And so I need you to have kind of a different kind of attention span around it. And then I think the one that Emma and I talk about a fair amount is those who are formerly foreign nationals themselves, who are advising based upon their individual experience, that it just, even if it was a year ago, it may not be applicable. You know, of an employee who is Dutch, her case just is not necessarily applicable to, you know, somebody who is Ghanaian or what have you. And so like, how do you kind of help people understand kind of where those lines are? And Emma has done a beautiful job in kind of her education with our constituents and broader on campus, our stakeholders, to kind of help academic advisors in particular know kind of where the lines are about what they should be kind of sharing information about and what they should dial 1-800-OIE and make sure that they reach out to us.
I can talk a little bit about one of the things that I found really helpful during all of this, especially in the last year or so, is having engagement not only within my institution, but also with peers at other schools. And, you know, knowing that that was a group that was experiencing the same struggles. We were an understood immigration speak and all of that, but at the same time, also understanding that we might not all do things the same way, and there isn't always going to be a right or wrong answer, because I don't know, I'm guessing you all have the same experience, but we have students and scholars who tell us all the time that their friend at XYZ University is doing it this way, or this business school is allowing their business students to do this. And so one of the things that we had to really pay attention to and think about was like, we don't always have to react quickly to that. And we can understand that schools are going to handle things differently. And there isn't always a right or wrong answer, especially when the information that's out there and the guidance we're getting from different agencies is ambiguous and unclear, or sometimes just absent. And so sort of, you know, taking the time to digest and think about what works best for our institution based on what we're doing and what, you know, what risks we're willing to accept or not accept is really important. But making sure you're engaging the right stakeholders when you make those decisions and decide how you're going to proceed.
Yeah, so some of the specific challenges that we have had in the past, I would say, I guess 12 months, we definitely have had folks on our campus who think they are immigration attorneys, which has been really fun, and we're advising, you know, students or even deign to say that what I'm advising was wrong and illegal. So that was a fun conversation where there were a lot of people involved. Deans were brought in, and you know, we were talking about the session before where I had to remind them, like, I'm the one who signed something under perjury penalty of law, right? Like if I advised us to do something wrong and illegal, like I'm going to jail and I don't really want to do that. So I'm pretty sure what I'm advising us to do is the right thing. So just having those conversations, I think, again, reminding folks like what I just said, but saying it in like a nice way. Like I would never jeopardize the health of our programs. I would never jeopardize our university, you as a faculty member, any of the programs or departments, you know, at BSU, that's not something that I would ever do. So, but I think it's important to just kind of remind folks that we do know what we're doing. And I even reminded people, I'm not an immigration attorney. I said, I've consulted with immigration attorneys, but I would never make a decision just blindly. So just letting them know that these things are vetted and researched, and it's not just something we're you know, blindly saying. Another specific challenge that we had was when the OPT amicus brief came out. Folks remember that? I was really, really advocating for our cabinet to get on board with that because, again, the big implications that were going on with OPT and what could potentially be lost for students was so huge that it was really important for, I felt, for us as a university to sign on to that and be part of that. Unfortunately, I wasn't convincing enough, I guess, and we did not join that amicus brief. But I looked at it as an opportunity to bring more advocacy to our cabinet, because we did have a statement that was sent from the Council of Presidents regarding the duration of status, and they did sign on to those lawsuits. So that was, for me, while I may have lost the OPT, it was a good stepping stone into saying there's going to be more need for your advocacy, and here are some more examples, and just getting in front of them. So I think that was really important. And then, obviously some of the challenges are COVID and how that's been impacting the in-person course availability and funding for our students. We don't have that solved yet. If anybody does, I'd love to know what you're doing for additional funding opportunities for students. And then I think there was also a question around working with people if there's staff turnover. So yes, that happens. But us at Bridgewater, fortunately, I've been working with a lot of the same people for many, many years. So I have that chance to establish new relationships. When we do have new deans that came into different positions, that was one opportunity where we did have to establish new relationships. And thankfully, they were not new to Bridgewater, but new to the role. So that helped as well. So there was that history. And then sometimes things just take time, right? Relationships take time to cultivate. And it's just important, like I said, with the constant communication to establish that and just remind folks, we're here to help. We're here to help you, and we're here to help the success of your program. I don't think any faculty or staff member would not want to be friends with you in a work setting if you said that to them. So that's been really helpful.
Thanks, Jen. Kim or Susan, anything you would want to add around staff turnovers and kind of how you handle that in your ongoing relationship management for compliance issues?
Yeah, I think it can be hard when we have so much work that we all need to do to kind of think 5 to 10 years down the road, but that is how I'm constantly always encouraging us within our office and with our partners on campus to think about is how do we build our systems such that the systems catch us if there's staff turnover and somebody doesn't know something, right? And that we have a particular type of relationship on one immigration matter on our campus where I knew like 7 years ago, I'm like, this is going to go so badly if we don't find a way to do this. And everyone is basically like, why are you freaking out? And then exactly what I predicted would occur if certain things didn't get set up because of the complicated nature of this relationship it actually ended up transpiring. And so I was like, okay, you know what? Like, it's always about like, how do you cross train, right? How do you document in ways like that you test out? Sometimes I document things and then Emma Swift comes in and she's like, okay, I have no idea what's in your head, Kim Howard. What did you mean by this? Like, and so how do you test those things out? And then how do you build those within your systems? And so that whether it's, the people on the other end who are doing the requesting, whether it's a business manager or what have you, whether it's an academic advisor, but how do we kind of help continue the education and have the systems help catch us? Because there will be staff turnover. I mean, that is the nature of life. And so how do we help ensure that future us's are successful?
Yeah, I hear you, Kim. We just had a very long-term person in our office. She's been at Dartmouth 25 years, retire. And so I've been sort of, planning for this moment for a long time, but when it comes, it's really, really hard. But having good training and cross-training and, teams of people, I think really helps, as well as a good check and balance. If you have an office that can accommodate, a team of advisors to handle things that way, and then having processes and systems documented is so key because we don't all have all that information in our head and have to be able to figure it out. And then as far as turnover in other offices, One thing, I know the others mentioned this, and I'll mention it too, we are so tied in with our department administrators across campus, and they are some of our most key relationships. They're the ones on the ground doing all the work, initiating cases with. And so every year we have an annual immigration update. Usually we give them lots of food, and everyone really loves it. We did it by Zoom, and still people showed up this year, so that was great. But we do it for both the student side and the scholar side, and some have to come to both because they work with both populations. But it's a great opportunity to meet new people who are in the role, catch up with people who have been in the role for a while, tell them what we're doing that's new, what changes have happened. We work with Synapsis, so we just went onto a new version of Synapsis and kind of gave them a demo of that, so they were ready to work in that system. So it just provides a really nice opportunity for us to touch base with that very key group every year. Similarly, our Dean of Faculty office that has a number of associate deans that make really critical decisions on appointments for our scholars and faculty. We schedule to meet with them usually once a year, maybe once every 2 years, because they cycle off in terms. And so we want to make sure that we're always in communication with the newest group of the associate deans as well as their assistants, and so that they understand the different types of work we do and why decisions they make are important to us from an immigration standpoint and the impact it can have on someone's immigration status. And so that's been another key group that we've tried to regularly stay in touch with.
Thanks, Susan. One thing I think about a lot with this is I'm thinking about a specific example at the University of Vermont. For a while, we had in various different pockets on campus. This is a student-specific thing, but I think the concept can be ported out. We had these experts. So we had an academic advisor in the School of Business for international students. We had a career center advisor who focused on international students. There's a lot can be gained by having kind of an expert in an office, but I think it's also important to make sure that there's breadth as well. And so what that maybe looked like in the Career Center was that we would have one-on-one meetings with our specific person. But if our specific liaison didn't also take that information out to the rest of the career advising staff, then you didn't necessarily have the type of stakeholder engagement that you would need if a student walks in and your point person happens to be on vacation that week, or if something comes up and that person leaves their job or whatever. And so I'm thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about within international offices, how do you ensure that stakeholder engagement is the work of everyone in the office, so that it's not just that we have 3 directors or people in leadership roles who are on the panel today. And those are often the people we look to kind of build those stakeholder relationships. But if it doesn't kind of transcend the organization, I think you have all sorts of issues, because one, Susan Ellison's calendar is probably very, very full. And so maybe I want to connect with her more frequently as a stakeholder, but there isn't the space. But maybe there are people within the staff with whom I could engage. And so I've been thinking about kind of on the team that I lead, which is within our international office, on each of them having liaison areas so that they each also have this reach across campus. And how do you keep building these webs so that you hear about things just a smidge earlier, right? So that you don't hear about it after all the planning has happened. And we've had some real moments like that where this really great change was made institutionally to how summer credit is awarded for internships. But we didn't have the right person who knew international stuff at the table because there was this siloing expert role within the Career Center who wasn't involved in the internship part of the Career Center. So there were these experts, but there wasn't kind of the crossing over that happens. And so I think about this work as everyone's work, and just invite, I guess, everyone on this call to think about whatever your role is within your office. How are you building stakeholder engagement within whatever kind of responsibilities you have? Because I do think it's a collective effort that really is important.
I just wanted to add really quickly, if
Yeah.
I could. So I just, as I'm sitting here thinking through this, and I know we had a call before to talk about this, but also I think we also need to remind ourselves that our students and scholars are also our stakeholders, right? Like it's their responsibilities to maintain their status accordingly. And so that's the kind of approach that we always have through our orientation, through our different programming, to build that trust and that community with our scholars and students so that they know that they can come to us, even if they think they made a mistake, I think that's the most important, right? Is to build that relationship up with them as well too. Like, oh, I think I might have done something, or can I do this? And it's important to remind ourselves that they're our main stakeholder. I know we're talking about externals, but it's important to have that attitude, I think, because then they know that they can always come to our office in addition to the other folks on campus, or they have a relationship with us and we can refer them to other people on campus that they know that they can trust to help them maintain their status too.
Thanks, Jen. That's a great point. So last question, and then we'll kind of close it out. For each of the three of you, are there any particular skills or resources that are important to you in this kind of specific aspect of your work of engaging stakeholders?
And I think that my job, when you think about what percentage you spend performing each of your job duties, and the percentage of time I've spent on advocacy has exploded over the last several years, and that's has its own range of skills that come with it. But it's really been, that's been fascinating, and I think, a really great learning experience to be, writing public comments and participating on amicus briefs, and just advocating within the institution, and also working more closely with our congressional delegation. And I definitely wanted to mention that. I know there's some other New Hampshire Granite Staters on the call today, and they can all attest to this as well, that when we meet for our New Hampshire state meetings for NAFSA, inevitably every meeting there are representatives from each of our congressional offices. And I think that that's been extremely valuable, both for us as NAFSA members and representing our institutions, but also for them. We have the opportunity to give them information about how the things they might or might not have heard about that are going on affect us and affect our students and our scholars, and they take that back, or at least I think they do. They're always taking furious notes, and so I think they do take it back, and I think that's been a great relationship that we've been fostering and growing and maintaining, especially these last few years. So definitely something. The other thing, I know we all, when we were talking about this, we all listed patience as our first skill to call upon, or quality. And that has been something I've been really working on, trying to be more patient and encourage others to be patient and say, where there's a pattern here, this is happening. There will be a lawsuit probably in the next few days. It will be enjoined. We won't be proceeding with it, at least for now, and then things will change. So let's all be patient and see how this plays out. So I think patience has been another thing. And the last thing I'll just mention is just, as Kim talked about earlier in a different context, but documenting the things that you're doing, especially during really uncertain times, documenting what decisions your office has made, why you made them, how you collaborated with others, and just having those resources available so that you can look back and say, well, why did we do that? Or did we tell SEVP that we were going to do this, and when our operations changed due to COVID, are we regularly watching those things? So I think that was another thing that, really we had to take it up a notch for that.
Kim, do you want me to go next? Okay. Again, I laughed about this question because the first thing that came to mind was a sparkling personality. That always helps, right? That was literally my first suggestion. I think, again, some of the things that I talked about is just being able to explain and having patience with yourself, and like you said, Susan, patience with other people too, because we live and breathe this. Like I think Emma said, this is our work. We do this every day, all day, and other people it takes some time for it to click. And so realizing you're going to have to explain the same situation or the same problem or the same issue multiple times, but eventually, we wear people down, right? And then they get it and they say, oh, okay, I understand why that works. And just, making sure that you're having that communication regularly with people, having a thick skin, because as I said, we can sometimes be seen as roadblocks to progress, which is really not the case. And reminding folks that there are certain guidelines and laws that we have to follow, and it's our job to maintain that, to make sure that the school is protected, that the students and scholars are protected. And I have found it helpful too, in terms of like starting new programs, reminding folks that it's not just about the student and scholars journey while they're with us, that it's also about how that could potentially impact them in the future. And sometimes that also really helps people understand that, you know, they could do this now, but if they do this now, these are the things that they may be subject to. And is that okay? Is that what you want to have happen in a program? So that's been helpful. Having access to obviously all of our networks and knowledge bases, the ability to just digest guidance, practice notes, legal standings. What's the difference between when something's a practice note? We have, as I'm sure most of you do with my DSO, we have intense conversations when new things are released, and we argue around, well, what does this one word mean? But it's put here, and how does that impact the statement? So knowing when to also call in for help, if things need to be elevated to my SIO or to cabinet, or if we need to call in the local immigration attorney that we need guidance from, I think is really important as well.
I think the only thing I'll add beyond being charming is plain English is really important. And I think it's been named in a couple of different ways. But there's just so much of this work that isn't really well understood, and kind of constantly empathy is huge. Absolutely for the foreign nationals with whom we're working, but also for our stakeholders. I mean, I often think about our business managers, the things that they have to contend with and the things that they have coming at them from all of these different people. Whether it's, you know, the dean or the faculty member or the associate dean or, you know, this investigator, whatever. Like, I mean, it's just kind of constant. And the same is true for our associate deans. The same is true for our deans. Like, everybody has a lot going on. And so it's like this, you know, how do we be clear, concise, communicate as plainly and, you know, as possible in language that others can understand relatively quickly, but that doesn't muddy or make it inaccurate, I think are some important skills. So, and then I'll just say an extra call out to timing and just knowing, just to be really aware of what other people are dealing with. And if there's a difference between making this call or asking this question or reaching out to somebody, you know, tomorrow versus today, because they're dealing with some major deadline that you should generally be aware of institutionally, because there's something big going on, to just be respectful of that and kind of be thinking about that.
Thanks. I often think about this. I think about people like our business managers who are having to digest this information because they're putting together a request for an H-1B, for example. But this is not the world they live in. And I know for me, it can sometimes be of utility to think for myself about things that I do not understand and thus find intensely irritating, like I-9 forms, like taxes, just things that I truly detest with most of my soul. And that may be the case for some of our departmental partners. And so how do we put things into language that's going to matter for them, but also really distill into the true essence of what we need them to know, or the information that we need to know from them. I think that can go a really long way. Kim named kind of at the end something that I just find this a really interesting space. And even when there aren't a bunch of changes happening around immigration regulations, your institutional dynamics are always shifting, right? And so much of stakeholder engagement really requires an understanding of those dynamics, of those organizational dynamics, to know when is the right moment to raise this thing, who is the right person or the right group of people to convene to get this information moved forward, who might be someone who has the ear of someone that is not necessarily the person per org chart. And so I just find this work really, really interesting. I hope that everyone who joined the call today was able to find something that you can take away and think about implementing, or I don't know, thinking about differently within your own work, and that we, so hopefully certainly ahead, have a more stable period around some of our immigration world, that Jen, we go back to a phase where seas are calm and not turbulent and not scary. but that hopefully you can take some helpful tips away. We have about 5 minutes left. If anyone has any questions, you're welcome to unmute yourself or throw those in the chat, and I'm sure that our panelists would be happy to answer them. But thank you for joining us today. I really am thrilled to see a great turnout and hope that you all have a really great afternoon.
If anyone has any other hidden secrets for excellent stakeholder engagement, throw those in there too. Yeah, Elizabeth, I'll say it is always Elizabeth Weber from UNH. It's always very refreshing to hear, oh yeah, everyone else is struggling with the same thing. And there is something about that helps just me take a breath and be like, okay, we'll keep going. We got this. We'll figure this out.
Especially when all of the higher levels are new to university and new to our world. And they don't speak the language, they don't understand, but oh yes, they're very big and supportive. And yes, in our office, we also do I-9. So I feel Emma.
Yeah, but that kind of that tunnel world that we can live in within our own offices, I've definitely found over the last year that connecting through GRAC, through the regional conference, through prep for panels is always a really validating thing of, okay, everyone's struggling with these things, even in just like an identity crisis of what is international education anymore. And so, yeah, I appreciate you naming that point. Any other questions or comments?
Wow, Jen, it seems that not only do we have sparkling and charming personalities, but we have conveyed everything anyone could possibly ever need to know about stakeholder engagement.
Yeah, it's an evolving process, right? It's something you have to do pretty much every day, right? It's like, I hate the term networking. Like I always used to, like, I hated it. I hated, networking, you got to do it. But it really, it's something you have to maintain and work at all the time with your stakeholders. So it's super important. Like I was thinking, one of the bigger challenges too that we're facing right now at BSU is reopening for fall. And I'm like, guys, I need a date because I need to put that on a document and I need to send that out now. So like, what are we doing? TikTok. And they're all like, well, so you have to have those conversations as things change.
Yeah, I can just say for UNH, we all had a date and then they changed the spring date on us. And all of our overseas students had the earlier date on, and all our continuing ones. And oh my gosh, what a challenge for registration for CVIS and for getting here on time. And yeah, CVP was not happy with us because here's one, I-20, here's another one. Which one is it? Oh, I don't know. The student's like, I don't know. They just keep sending them to me.
Yeah, there's definitely probably some collective trauma in all of this. Just the ever-present nature of change. All right, well, I think we're questionless. So we'll go ahead and thank everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a really lovely afternoon and some more good SIW content coming up soon. So keep an eye out for Ozan's super informative Wednesday.
And Emma, thanks for organizing this. Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure.
Yes,
Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Good to see you all.
Good to see you as well.